I'm going to go ahead and get started, just so there's a lot to cover today. And this is a 2-hour workshop with a 30-minute break in between the 2 hours. Now, I understand that's a large time commitment, so I do appreciate everyone being here. In the event that you can't attend the full 2 hours, this workshop is being recorded. And I want to remind everybody that by registering for this, for the PCW, you agreed to abide by the Code of Conduct. So please refer to that on the website. So this workshop is being recorded, but I want to make it a safe space. I want people to feel comfortable to share their experiences if there's something they really want to relay to everyone else. So I'm really going to be reliant on the chat window, and I'm really going to ask a lot of questions to all of the participants to share what you think, to not necessarily share an experience, but maybe share how you relate to the concept. So it can get personal. But for those of to make you feel more comfortable, as I'm reading comments out of the chat window, I don't associate comments with anyone's name for that reason, right? So we can all have like this flow of ideas together, but I want everyone to be comfortable speaking up, even if they feel slightly uncomfortable with a question they're asking or a comment they're making. In addition to that, if you really want to remain anonymous, please just send me a private message through the Zoom chat window. And I'll be sure to read it out to everyone, but I won't reference your name at all, of course. And just be sure not to use any information that might identify you. So most importantly, I ask that everyone be here as much as you can. Reflect and participate in the way that is most comfortable for you. But I do want to emphasize that there may be some concepts, there may be some things that you don't agree with, but we have to step back and look through it through a different lens. And sometimes we have to look through it outside of our lens of privilege. And one final thought is I want to remind everyone that Rubin Observatory is committed to creating and maintaining diversity in its workforce and community through equitable and inclusive practices. So for this 2-hour workshop, I'm going to be talking about bystander intervention and how to be an ally. So for part 1, I'm going to talk about a model called StepUp, bystander intervention. And for this first activity, I'm going to launch a poll. And I want everyone, it's completely anonymous. I want everyone to answer to the best of their ability. It's 6 questions long. So I ask that everyone take a moment and answer. And if you can't see the poll, let me know in the chat. So I do want to mention that option number 6 is a multiple choice question, so you can select as many options that apply. There is an option that is missing, and that option would be a kind of none of the above option. Unfortunately, Zoom has we're limited by only allowing 10 multiple choice options. And I chose to omit the none of the above option in this case. But if you really feel like you can't answer that question number 6, that you haven't witnessed any of those events, please send me a message, and I want to reflect that during the talk for sure. So yeah, I see a question in the chat. Is in the workplace, specifically the Rubin workplace, or over the course of our entire career? I want to say that it's over the course of your career, right? In the workplace, we're not in any specific workplace at the moment, right? But throughout our careers, throughout our participation in astronomy or STEM careers, I want to ask if you've witnessed any of these things. And I'm not specifically asking about Rubin behaviors or anything like that. I want everyone to kind of freely associate these concepts. I see 67% of us have participated. I'm going to give it maybe 2 more minutes so we can finish up. So I see a question that needs clarification. What is a problem situation? It sounds, a problem situation or a problem is something that you observe or perceive that makes you uncomfortable. I'm sorry, is there a, yeah, there is a rectangular box. That's the poll window. I'm really sorry about that interference. Once everyone has participated, I'll launch the results and that will go away. But this particular slide doesn't have any information on it. It's simply a prompt to launch the poll. Sorry for the distraction. I want to get back to what a problem situation is and how we interpret that, right? It's any situation that you perceive someone else being uncomfortable or makes you uncomfortable, right? So in number 5, I feel confident that I can intervene with my colleagues in problem situations. We're going to be talking about a lot about social situations. There's also a message that came in that says, you cannot submit the poll without checking at least one box from number 6. That's true. I am sorry for the design error. So if the results are skewed, I apologize, but you can send me a message if you'd like to change that answer. So there's this question here that we're going to actually get into. So you might be uncomfortable on someone else's behalf. That's absolutely possible. And the way I want to illustrate it right now is, imagine you're watching maybe a comedy film or something like that, and you know you're watching someone or something in an embarrassing moment. Sometimes you feel embarrassed for them, even though you're not directly impacted, right? Or you know, even in real life, of course, when you're watching, you know, if you see someone get reprimanded or if you see someone, you know, have an uncomfortable situation, you might empathize with that and feel uncomfortable yourself. So that's what I mean. You could be uncomfortable for someone else. Okay, I see 30 out of 32 people participated. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll so we can review the results together. So yeah, thank you all for participating. I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So it looks like out of the 30 people who participated in this poll, that at least 43% of us agree that if someone intervenes in a problem situation, usually a negative outcome can be avoided. 80% of us agree that it is their responsibility to intervene when they notice a problem situation. A lot of us disagree that someone else will take responsibility to intervene in a problem situation. And of course, we go on to see that a lot of people don't feel that they have the skills to effectively intervene with colleagues in a problem situation. And I feel confident that I could effectively intervene. Again, that's no one really strongly agrees with that. It looks like the majority either don't agree or disagree with that statement. And here's the important one is, have you witnessed any of these things in the workplace? Now, I'm reminded of the fact that there was none of the above, but let's look at this. 77% of participants today have witnessed covert or subtle discrimination in the workplace in their STEM careers, right? That's a huge number. And I mean, several of these answers have the majority of participants saying that they witness it. Favoritism, bullying, verbal harassment, right? These things are not even remotely okay for a workplace, yet we've all experienced them. I'm just taking screenshots of the poll results. I will be posting these in the slides for future reference. But I just want to remind everybody they are completely anonymous. So I hope you're okay with me sharing these results. All right, now I will stop sharing the poll results and hopefully that annoying box covering the presentation will go away. So now I want to introduce this concept of bystander intervention, okay? So bystander intervention is an evidence-based framework that is to reduce the victim's burden of protecting themselves from harassment and shift the burden to the community. And by community, I mean other people in a working group or other people in a collaboration. Whatever you interpret community to mean, it's appropriate to think of in this case. So this workshop was, I compiled it from the facilitator notes and resources that were developed by the University of Arizona Commitment to Athletes Total Success, or the C.A.T.S program. A version of it was run for the scientific community by the United States Geological Survey. And so I want to share with you a little anecdote about how effective bystander intervention can be and what it looks like. So a little fact about myself is that I use a lot of inappropriate words when I speak to my friends and people I know well, people I'm comfortable with. I have a dirty mouth that can make a sailor blush. And sometimes when I get and make friends with my coworkers, I bring those practices into the workplace sometimes. And I remember once I was working at an observatory in a rural area, and I was working at an observatory in a rural area, I apologize, and I had made friends with my coworkers. And one night while we were snowed in at the telescope, I was talking with a friend of mine, and there were a few other people in the office building. And of course, we were just being friendly and talking. And at the time, I got really heated about something, and I just laid out this really terrible sentence, and it was just full of swear words and really inappropriate things. And my coworker was like, you know, I know a lot of people around here really aren't a fan of the cussing. And, you know, he told me, maybe you should tone it down a bit because you never know who's listening. And when I heard that, my first reaction honestly was embarrassment. I was just like, geez, I have no idea how many times I've been doing that and people have not, you know, not liked it, right? How many people have I been doing it around? Like, who's overheard me talking? And then I kind of felt defensive, like, well, I mean, who's to decide what professional is, right? We're all adults here. I would never say that to children and all of these things. And all of these things happen in my mind really quickly. But at the end of the day, at the end of it, the realization I came to was swearing and saying all these silly things was not essential to my identity. Like, if I wanted to really get along with my coworkers, I didn't want to be the person who made it awkward in the workplace. I didn't want to be the person who made other people uncomfortable, because honestly, swearing isn't a part of who I mean, it's a personality trait, but it's not something that was central to my identity, right? So that after that moment, I tried really hard to work on swearing in the workplace. And even when I felt it was safe or we were comfortable, I just, you know, worked on it online and offline, we could say, right? Because there was no I didn't want to continue being that person. So right now, I want everyone to kind of dig deeper into this survey. And I want you to think about this question: could a problem have been avoided if someone had intervened? Why would someone disagree with this? Or why would someone agree with this? And I see a comment in the chat that asks, are there additional materials on the Google Drive that you already sent on Slack? I can add additional materials, but there is a Google Drive that I have bookmarked in this Slack channel that has resources for education about diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as a folder of activities that everyone is encouraged to bring back to their working groups. They're really fun, including the facilitator notes for this workshop. So I encourage everyone to look at that. But for now, getting back to this, I want people to think about, could a problem have been avoided if someone had intervened? Why would you disagree, or why would you agree? And post your thoughts in the chat. So I'm going to say that between surveys that I've done on for this workshop before, and combining the results from surveys that were done on the campus of the University of Arizona and participants of the USGSC's program, an average of 88% of responders say that intervention will prevent the problem from getting worse or stop it from continuing. So I see some people posting in the chat, the way someone intervenes is extremely important, and we're going to talk about that, of course. It's more that if there's no intervention, it will happen again. And that's a very good point. Someone mentioned that they would disagree because the person intervening could make the situation worse. And we're also going to talk about those situations as well. So bullying I witnessed was by high-level managers that I don't think could have been touched by intervention. And that's a sticky situation too. So I hope we're able to touch on those kinds of situations further on in the workshop. It depends on which kind of intervention and by whom, I'm sorry. The nature of the problem, the people make a difference. Hiring discrimination, I witnessed, I tried to intervene, it had no effect. And of course, who it is, it depends on the person. All of these things are very important, right? But you know, while you can think about specific situations, the overall outcome is that most of the time, if people feel that if someone intervenes, if the right person intervenes, it could improve the problem. So I'm seeing more comments. I think whether it makes a difference or not is situational, right? If the person who intervenes has little respect and power, they may not be able to help. It works better if it's inadvertent, but if someone is being problematic intentionally, they're likely just going to double down. An intervention for, I didn't really realize it, can be quite successful. Straight up abuse of power, differential bullying, intervention won't help. I tried to intervene in a very uncomfortable situation and it completely backfired. Professors were bullying students, and in the end, we had to apologize for calling them out. That's just awful, and I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope that what I can communicate today is the little things, is the things that we can all take responsibility for and try to contribute to a positive atmosphere. And I want to emphasize that to people who are in this presentation today, or people who watch it later, if you're in a position of privilege, it is absolutely essential for you to model these behaviors if we want to improve the situation in STEM, if we want to improve the situation in astronomy or at the Rubin Project, or for any perspective that you're thinking of, right? So, you know, we've touched on this a little bit. I want you to think about it again. Whose responsibility is it to intervene? And do you think other people in this workshop are more or less likely to help than you are, right? And we've had some kind of answers about this today, but you know, if anyone hasn't spoken up, I'd like to see your thoughts. Feel free to keep sending messages. Yeah, and follow up to the comment about intervene in an uncomfortable situation with professors. The professors made us write an official letter retracting what we had said. It was terrible. So I'm really sorry to hear that. That sounds rough. There's another comment here. The story of the governor of New York State is making me think a lot about intervention and its effectiveness, right? There are people, there are situations where, yes, it can be effective, right? The governor of New York, due to sexual harassment allegations, was eventually just forced to resign after being isolated by people more powerful than him, right? So there's another comment. I suppose when there are superiors involved, helping the person realize that someone may have gone wrong without directly calling them out may prevent people getting defensive. And that's a very good point. So I appreciate everyone for sharing your comments. Keep them coming in. But I want to emphasize that there's this overlap of individual leadership and shared responsibility, right? Most of us want to make positive, informed decisions to help others. We are a part of a larger community and should share this responsibility. And I want you to think about this. How can you create the culture that you want to be a part of, right? My goal is to review some strategies to intervene effectively when someone needs help. So I'm going to go over some variables that may stop us from helping, right? Because I want to bring these things to our collective consciousness, because knowing about them might help us understand them, might help us work past them. So individual variables include the knowledge of how to help or the lack of knowledge of how to help, a confidence, or a sense of responsibility. Situational variables are the perceived severity of need, are other bystanders around, and of course, the cost of intervention. And we'll talk about that a little later in the workshop. Victim variables are, the relationships between the victim and other people, or the perceived deservedness of intervention. And of course, the victim, do they even want help? Will intervention pull the victim into a situation they don't want to be in? Is someone who's intervening playing a hero and making it worse, which was a comment that came up before. And we'll talk about that and how to mitigate it, right? Another fact is that situational variables are the strongest predictor of whether someone will help. So some of these situational variables and individual variables are the bystander effect. So people are less likely to help when they're in a group than when they are alone, right? The sense of responsibility decreases as the number of witnesses increases. The diffusion of responsibility is also kind of related to that. The greater number of people present, the less likely help will be given due to belief that other people have the training or they know the victim better. I want to pause here right for a moment. I see another comment. There is a culture that has to be changed, and I am 100% in agreement with that. So in reference to the anecdote about the professors thought they were doing the right thing as much as you thought you did because they were educated and lived in a certain culture. That may be true, but there might be also other things going on at play there, such as self-preservation and abuse of power, right? And those are things that require other people at equal stance or just a majority overrule. Another variable, this is a comment from the chat, another variable may also be past trauma from being victimized in past interactions. So an example, when faculty are terrorizing students, how are people expected to stand back up after experiencing such previous trauma? Another comment says, my experience, the efficiency of an intervention depends on the power relations between the parts. If equal or stronger, the intervention appears to be more effective. So thank you all for the comments. All of these things that are being brought up in the comment chat are things we're going to address. So I want to make sure to have time to get all of them. So I'm going to keep pushing through. I want to briefly talk about the variables here. Conformity and ambiguity. So people want to preserve relationships, right? Their beliefs and their behaviors are influenced by others somehow, right? They generally underestimate the extent of another person's concern. And this is called pluralistic ignorance, right? Ambiguity is when you don't know if it really even is a problem, or do you just think it is? How can you resolve ambiguity? And we're going to talk about that soon. Other variables: obedience to authority, willful neglect, looking the other way, saving face, ignoring it. But this willful neglect is not the same as witnessing a problem and freezing in action because you don't know what to do or you're afraid. Willful neglect is that you process it as a problem, but you choose not to do anything about it, right? So I'm going to read through the comments that I have here, and I want everyone to think about other factors that may stop someone from helping, or that might motivate someone to help. How do these factors affect the decision? And we've been talking about this already, right? Status in the workplace, social beliefs, physical traits, maybe. So I see a comment here. It strikes me that this is basically the same thing that's taught in CPR classes. The first thing you do is point at someone and say, "You, go call 911." If you don't explicitly make it someone's job, everyone else will just hope someone else calls 911. In this case, we're going to have to point at ourselves and say, "You need to do this, not someone else." It's not easy. So what do I mean? And I see another comment. What do I mean by physical traits? Well, in an intervention situation, say someone has a physically imposing stature. And I'm not talking about physical altercations or anything like that. I'm talking about just even feeling intimidated by them simply because they're larger than you, right? Or if they are a very, brisk speaker, or they're very abrupt or anything like that, those can play a role in deciding whether to intervene or whether to call them out. Some other comments I'm hearing, or I'm reading here, is that there's one that says it's really hard to know if something is a problem or whether one is just oversensitive or overreacting. You need to check in with an ally sometimes, and we're going to talk about that. If the person causing the problem is Black and you are white, you run the risk of being called a racist if you interfere. That's an interesting perspective, and that is a possibility. But in the case that in the case of allyship and intervention, there's a lot to be done about resolving ambiguities and about really understanding how the person feels and what they want, right? So that is something I hope we can address. We can mitigate those things by some of the techniques we're going to learn later on in the workshop. Someone mentioned that if they're better looking or more personable or well liked, so there's less intimidation, but more of a halo effect, right? And so yeah, social traits of a person, right? Nobody's going to want to call out someone who is well liked, even if they exhibit bad behavior, right? But that's something that we have to try to bypass, because even if there's this perception that this person is socially accepted, allowing the bad behavior to continue is just going to slowly poison the climate. So we've talked about why we might not help. Now I want to talk about 5 steps, the StepUp model, 5 steps to effectively intervene that address some of those variables. So the StepUp model is these 5 steps. So you notice the event, interpret it as a problem, assume personal responsibility, know how to help, and implement the help, or step up. So first, how do we notice the event? Okay, so try to be observant, right? Be aware of participants in a meeting or of your surroundings in the office. And in the case of like Zoom meetings, especially when we all turn off our cameras, sometimes the chat window can be really telling, as I'm leveraging that right now, right? But in the case that we're, physically occupying similar space, have you noticed anyone, what is the general tone? What is the general air of the meeting? Does anyone seem uncomfortable? Did anything make you uncomfortable? Or are you not bothered? Or are you just trying to forget about it due to one of the variables, right? Maybe you're just trying to minimize your own discomfort because you don't want to escalate. And that's something we have to untangle individually, right? So how do we interpret it as a problem? Do you think what you saw or heard is a problem? Does what you saw, heard, perceived, does it contradict the culture that you want to be a part of? So if you don't see it as a problem, you'll mentally just keep going. You'll check out, right? You'll file it away in the do nothing part of your memory warehouse and just keep going. But here's the important work to do in this situation. So if the situation is unclear, if it's ambiguous, try to investigate to clear up ambiguity. So this means you can just ask others if they saw or perceived the event and how they interpreted it. What would they do? Look around or listen to confirm if others are concerned, or in a Zoom meeting, even if all the cameras are off, if there's audio, and I'm not trying to advocate that everyone is an expert in reading emotions or reading tone, right? That's impossible for people to do, even if they claim they're great at it. But it's just trying to be perceptive, and if something seems off to you, there's nothing wrong with sending the person just a private message, right? If there was a specific person or it seemed like there was a specific target, just a simple, are you okay, in a private communication can really go a long way, right? So the third step in the StepUp model is to assume personal responsibility, okay? Think about how you can safely and respectfully assume personal responsibility. Acknowledge that if you don't step up, no one else might, right? If you take the first step, others will likely follow. Now, I can't guarantee this for 100% of situations, right? And there were, we've seen comments already that said, we did intervene when it was a problem and it totally backfired. And that is horrendous and disgusting, and it's terrible, and I'm sorry. But if we let that failure dominate the rest of our experience, if we just assume that no one else will, if we assume that will be the tone for the rest of our careers, then nothing will change. And that's just the fact. And I promise that even I'm not going to reference emergency situations except for this one time, right? These are not about emergency situations where somebody is in danger, right? I cannot train everybody how to do that online. But I want to remind you that if you take a step to call attention to it, others will follow, because you taking that one step breaks the bystander effect, right? And in the case where it's a public intervention, or in the case where there's some offline discussion about it that involves several people, if you point out that bad behavior, others will likely start paying attention to it for the very least, right? So let's try to break this bystander effect together. The fourth step is knowing how to help, right? And I'm going to spend a decent amount of time talking about knowing how to help. Being an active bystander can mean getting the right people to help. You're not alone. If you set a good example, others will likely follow. What kind of intervention tools are in your toolbox? Do you know your reporting resources if you think that's the best course of action? Do you have allies in the workplace? How can you get more in-depth training on these skills? Okay, there are many strategies for effective intervention, and I'm going to talk about them right now. So I see a comment that says, this might not always be true. Often others might be hostile and not follow, right? And yes, there are situations where, you might be looked down upon for publicly intervening, but some of the strategies I'm talking about, this is not exclusively about you getting, you perceiving something that makes you uncomfortable in a meeting and immediately calling it out. In fact, there are a lot of strategies that we can draw attention to problems without public demonstration, right? Because a lot of people are just uncomfortable with that. So some more comments say, there should be a community behind the intervention to know that it would be supported. And someone else said that I agree. I have been called all sorts of names for standing up, and not just in the situation I mentioned, which they're referring to the situation, the anecdote of the professors when they called out toxic behavior and they were forced to apologize for calling it out. So in relation to step 4, I want to talk about what are some strategies for helping, right? And these are the 5 Ds. Direct help. This may lead to a confrontation, right? There are cases where it's necessary and useful. And I'm going to, it's in the resources of the slide deck, and it's really, really powerful. It's called How to Have a Difficult Conversation. Direct help, I'm going to tell you right now, is the most effective when you are in a position of privilege, right? I understand as a supervisor or as a leader of a collaboration or anything like that, that you may not want to potentially embarrass or call out someone else and risk their career. But there are ways that you can directly call out bad behavior respectfully, right? And we need to try to find ways of doing this. Another D is to distract. In the case that it was in a meeting or an interaction, redirect the conversation or turn the attention to something else so it can be brought up later when it's more appropriate. Delegate. If there was a victim involved in this situation that you witnessed, ask someone that knows the person to check in with them. Maybe just mention, hey, that seemed like a weird interaction. Maybe you can, I don't know them very well, but maybe you can ask if they're okay. Delay. If you can't take action in the moment, you can make a difference with you directly asking that person or the victim, are you okay? Or offering help afterwards. And importantly, document, right? Maybe the situation already diminished. Maybe you observed or perceived something that happened quickly. Just make a note of what happened and when, because this will be very helpful in later clearing up ambiguity. And it will also help establish a pattern of behavior if there is one, right? So number 5 is to step up and help, right? This program is trying to raise awareness of why people don't intervene so we can bring these barriers into our consciousness. But we still need to, in order to help, we need to make sure it's safe to intervene for ourselves and others. Will the intervention respect all parties, right? Is it appropriate to publicly call out something, or will it be better to just take it offline? And I understand that some people have kind of quicker emotional reactions, but you know, in the case that you observe something in a meeting or you observe something, you know, as a bystander, try to carefully assess the situation as well as you can before immediately reacting, right? And of course, we all need to balance the pros and cons of helping. So I have a question that's directed to me. In your opinion, should the documentation be usually sent to a higher authority, Title IX or Human Resources or similar? That's a really good question, right? Because a lot of us feel, and a lot of us have seen cases where reporting it through the established authorities, we have fear of backlash. We have fear of retaliation. Are those reports, are they really confidential? And that's why it's really important to establish allies in the workplace. It's really important to establish allies in the group, ombuds people, things like that, because sometimes people just aren't going to go through established communication channels for whatever reason, right? And that's just the reality of it. Sometimes there have been retaliations, as much as we try to assure people that reporting is the right thing to do. But allyship, ombuds people in a working group, those are the really important things. And you have to build trust with somebody. You have to build trust with somebody who's established for that work in the working group, right? And it's an emotionally heavy job as well, right? But I mean, that's how we all support each other within our communities. So just another brief anecdote. I'm a diversity advocate for Aura and the Aura observatories in Chile. And in my role as a diversity advocate, I try to serve as one of these allies. Like if people are having troubles and things like that, I encourage them to come to me, because I have no intention of necessarily reporting anything. I want to be that first step. I want to be that person that they can come to. What should I do? Or just listen. A lot of being an ally is just listening to problems and just trying to understand what this person is going through, right? So in my role as diversity advocate, I want to be that stepping stone. Honestly, if I felt like someone came to me with something egregious, I would want to help them through the reporting process, right? Sometimes it's absolutely necessary that they have to report. Otherwise, nothing will happen. But me as a diversity advocate and other allies, we're there saying we want to help you through this process. We want to help you find what you need. I'm going to be your wingman. Sorry for the expression, that was the best thing I could come up with, but I'm going to be your ally. I want to help you. I'm going to support you. And I'm there to say, I believe you, this is a problem, right? And as an ally, I'm going to try to look for other people who feel the same, respectfully, not with revealing any information, right? But it's about building trust. Someone has a comment there that's one of the cultural changes, I guess, that needs to happen in a difficult environment, that people in authority make it safe and worthwhile to document and report issues. And someone else said, I completely agree. Empathy is very important in any of these situations. So I want to talk about balancing the pros and cons, right? What is the cost of intervention? Will you lose face within the group or the office? What if you're wrong and it's not a problem? Or what if no one supports you? What are the costs of not helping? Maybe nothing, right? The bad behavior continues or gets worse, or the person or the people affected suffer more. So often fear inhibits a person from helping, right? But how are we going to tip these scales? Try to, in these cases, some advice is that focus on what you want others to do for you, and try to imagine a worst case scenario. Find even a small way to step up, right? Others will likely follow. And even a small way to step up is to ally yourself with that person, is to just listen to them, hear their story, right? If they're comfortable telling it to you. Because in the end, if we can't bring down this big authority, or if they have too much support, it's up to us to support each other. So some intervention strategies I want to review before we have to wrap up this part of the workshop. And someone made a comment that this is a very idealistic view and not the experience we have. That's very true, right? But social allyship and being there to support each other, it's work. It's emotional work. It's why oftentimes a lot of people who work in diversity, equity, and inclusion sometimes we burn out, or sometimes we don't feel like we are making a difference. Social change is hard. It takes a long time. It's emotionally taxing. But you have to want to be a part of the culture that you want to be in. You have to help build it, right? And I'm sorry if this is very idealistic and doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but it's going to be very important for all of us to keep this in mind, right? And we're trying to make that cultural shift where individual efforts are supported, right? It's why the science collaborations have diversity and equity committees. It's why Rubin has a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's why we have these code of conducts and reporting systems here. It's why we're trying. It's why we're creating time in this project and community workshop to talk about these things. This is a very basic step, right? But it's a step. I need to move on. I just want to talk about a few intervention strategies, which is one of them is called the SEEK model. So SEEK, safe and respectful responding, right? You want to be a lifeguard, but not a superhero. Sometimes you can endanger yourself. You might not have the training to intervene, but you can provide a lifeline. And that lifeline is simply listening or asking if that person is okay. Early intervention is, if you see something, instead of just filing it away, try to respectfully resolve any ambiguities about it, right? Because the sooner you call attention to it, if you can, the better. Effective helping, right? For ongoing problems, try to crowdsource among your colleagues, look for allies, find experts. Are there any resources in problem solving for that group? And of course, K is kind helping, right? Try to understand what the person in distress wants. Ask them privately, right? And try to consider other perspectives, not just your perspective and the victims. And I have this quote posted here. I'm sorry, I don't know who originally said it, but everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, always, right? So I'm going to go to the next slide, forgive me. I want everyone to take a look at this picture and put in the chat what you see. This is another part of the intervention strategy, is perspective taking, right? When a situation is ambiguous, like you don't know what's really going on, try to consider various points of view. So if you do check in with that victim or someone you perceive as a victim, it might reveal that the event was not isolated, the behavior has happened before or is getting worse. What led up to the event? Why might it have occurred? So this is just a fun little game about, or a fun little optical illusion, right? So when you initially just look straight on at the picture, it's a frog. But if you turn your head 90 degrees, you can also see a horse head. So someone mentioned they see frog, but now I can't unsee the horse, right? So I'm going to address a few comments that came up before I posted this slide, right? So others, especially in cultures that support bullying, might not help. I agree, in positive cultures it might. Someone else mentioned that they worked on diversity and inclusion for many years until it eventually cost me my job. Keep in mind that these things can happen in academia and they are not as rare as we want to believe. Someone else mentioned the fact that it is idealistic does not mean it's not practical. Ideals can help to build helpful practice, I think. Someone asked a question, can simply making yourself present in the situation be sufficient? Just like entering the room, but not saying or doing anything else. And yes, in certain situations that can, right? Just, it might be uncomfortable for a minute, but I mean, it's the lowest energy thing you can do when you see someone. If you perceive two people who are maybe arguing or something, don't insert yourself in the conversation, simply insert yourself in the space. And you may actually diffuse that argument for the moment. So thank you for those comments and questions. I really appreciate everyone sharing. I want to talk about a few more intervention strategies. And again, I want to emphasize that these are assessment in non-emergency situations, right? In the case that we might perceive a physical altercation happening in our working group or workplace, that is outside the scope of this talk, right? And there are resources for that kind of stuff, but in the very minimum that you might want to do in that situation is simply, while keeping yourself in a physically safe space, just draw attention to it, call out for help, right? And typically the people who are in a physical altercation might be distracted and might not realize upon having more witnesses may back off. Sorry for that tangent, but I want to talk about how we can assess non-emergency situations. And again, I'm saying this over and over again, and we're going to talk about allyship in the second half of this talk. Find allies in your workplace, right? Find the allies of the person in distress, but tread very lightly when speaking on their behalf, right? You don't want to project what you feel onto the victim, right? You're not speaking over them, and you're not really speaking for them. You're speaking about them, right? So don't make what you perceived as a problem for them, don't exaggerate it because you feel upset, right? Because you might not understand what's really going on. And again, be a lifeguard, not a superhero. Throw a lifeguard in lifeguard training. The lifeguard is always instructed about how to help a victim who's drowning or who's in water. But the first thing lifeguards practice is either anchoring themselves on the shore or on the pool side and throwing a buoy or life support. Also, lifeguards go through a lot of training about how to take the victims so they won't be compromised in the water themselves, including about how to escape a drowning victim. So I have a question here. What would be the role of the allies in this case? Listen and advise on how to report, or more than that? And an ally can serve a lot of different roles. And since we're running short on time here, I'm going to leave that for the ally part of the workshop. I hope you can join us for the second half of that, but if not, I want to assure you it will be recorded. So, intervention strategies. Friends helping friends. Sometimes it is a friend who needs intervention. In my case, a friend of mine, a coworker who felt comfortable with me, intervened. And you know what? Maybe they helped contribute to creating a more inclusive atmosphere because people weren't feeling uncomfortable in the workplace for things I was saying. In the case that you're intervening on a friend, you need to think about, in any case, you need to think about I statements. I care, right? Why are you stepping in? I see, or I observe, or I perceive. Describe behaviors as you perceive them, right? I feel, I wonder, what do you think about what happened? I will support you, right? Make the commitment for that as much as you can. And then there's this quote, it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but a great deal more to stand up to our friends, right? That was from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But, you know, while it was a children's book, I think that that quote has a really big impact, right? And we need to think about that when we're talking with our friends, when our friends are saying inappropriate things, even if you don't think it's inappropriate, think about how other people might feel and leverage your privilege as their friend. Intervention strategies on teams and in groups, right? Always keep in mind the workplace culture. What workplace culture do you want for that group, for that office, for that collaboration? How are you contributing into it? Okay. So a lot of the science collaborations for Rubin, including Rubin and of course Aura and Noir Lab, we all have meeting guidelines, codes of conduct, and these are all kind of becoming standard practices in big collaborations or office spaces. But how are we really modeling those behaviors, right? It's nice to have a pretty poster printed up, and it's nice to have a code of conduct. How are we really modeling those things in every interaction we have? In every meeting, what are we doing to make it more inclusive, right? How are we creating space for everyone to speak up? And of course, apart from that, we need to think about how can the organization help to avoid high-risk situations? And by high risk, I mean, what kind of organization is it? Is it an organization that lets abusive professors run amok? And in the case that nothing is done about it, nothing is addressed, then if you can, maybe it's time to just move on, right? We can all, and this is also idealistic, and I apologize. I understand a million reasons why we can't just leave a situation that may be bad for us, right? But we have to try to remember that we need to choose the culture we want to be a part of, right? And how we contributed to it. One more thing is just when emotions are high, right? The reasons people are upset don't matter as much as helping them feel heard. Trying to sort out who did what is less important than focusing on how people feel about it. And sometimes humor can be a nice diffuser, but it's tricky because you don't want to belittle or patronize anyone, right? And of course, finally, intervention strategies, we need to remember our values, right? When our values and our actions are not aligned, we could feel uncomfortable. If we want to help, everybody who responded that they want to help, but they don't, it's going to exacerbate how we feel. It's going to exacerbate this discomfort, right? So as a bystander, when something is headed in the wrong direction, remind yourself of how it felt at a time before when you could have intervened but didn't, right? Motivate yourself to champion a positive atmosphere in the way that you can. And the last slide I want to end on just for this part of the workshop is how to have a difficult conversation. So I want to advertise the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, UCAR, has an amazing soft skills program, and all of these tons of resources. I have their link to their website and additional materials, but when you have a direct intervention, right, and it's time to have that difficult conversation, especially if you're in a position of privilege and you're calling out bad behavior of someone who's not, you need to remember these kind of rules. And these were also in the reflected in the meeting guidelines that I had at the beginning, right? Use the words ouch and oops, right? If you say something that's unintended, just ouch, oops, and just move on. Everybody's right, but only partially. How to call someone out? Call out their words, not their intentions, right? Because this is related to intent and impact. Intent does not equal impact. Even though you didn't mean something to be hurtful, you have no control over if it was or not, right? Learn how to apologize. All of these things are in the additional materials. I will, in the Slack channel, the Google Drive resource is linked. And in these slides, which are also available in the Slack channel, all of these resources are listed at the very end of the slide deck. So I encourage you to look them up. Someone messaged me and said, just want to say, I think it is normal to make suggestions for areas of improvement and share ideas and see them come to fruition and not get any credit for it. It's hard, but for me personally, it's okay because it's for the greater good. Okay, we're at the end of our time for this first workshop. We have a 30-minute break. I encourage everyone to come back, but if you can't make the time commitment, I totally understand. It will be recorded and posted as soon as the team can get to it. Thank you everyone so much for your amazing comments and participation. I hope we can keep this energy going. I will be on Slack for the next 30 minutes. So feel free to reach out to me either privately or on that channel, and let's keep the discussion going. So hopefully I'll see everybody in 30 minutes.
Will you be in the inclusiveness Slack channel, or have you opened a new one for this?
There's a new channel. It's called, I'm sorry, I can't post the link that quickly. Let's see.
Okay, but it will be something like Allies. So I will Google.
Yes, it's called Day 3 Wednesday slot 2B23. Let me and bystander ally.
Somebody just sent it. Thank you so much. That was super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming.